All right, biology students, this is a quick little introduction to the immune response system. There are two different parts to the immune response. There is first the inflammatory response over here on this side, and then the immune response to a specific pathogen. And I'm going to go into more detail first in the general inflammatory response to any kind of an injury. And then second, we'll go over the details behind the immune response to a specific pathogen. So my first piece of advice would be to take these two tables and put one over here as diagram on page 1, and the second one over here on a second diagram. And it would be a good idea right now to pause and give yourself time to do that. All right, biology students, I have now zoomed in on the inflammatory response. This is anything that happens in any sort of a situation where there is some kind of an injury of any kind. Ooh, that's some pretty ugly handwriting, isn't it? And anytime there's any sort of injury, there's going to be an alarm that is sent off. And that particular alarm inside the body is called interferon. And I like to look at this word as being between fire. Now, I don't know if that's really true or not, but what I'm looking at here is that this is a smoke signal from one cell to another cell. This is a chemical smoke that comes off from one cell to another and says, help, help, I've been infected, I've been infected. So this is the inflammatory response to any kind of an injury to any part of a cell. And anytime there's some sort of an injury, it will release something called histamine. And I know that some of you have had allergies and taken antihistamines. And the antihistamines are going to go up here and they are going to stop histamine and work against it. These are antihistamines. And we would take those kinds of things if we are wanting to work against something that is attacking the body. And once there's some blood, or once there's the release of histamine, that is going to cause blood to go to that site. And I'm going to speak here specifically about two different things that are involved in the blood in the immune response. The first one is going to be the addition of platelets to that area. And those platelets are going to cause the blood to clot. We want the bleeding to stop eventually, so the platelets are going to be the part that will do that. It will clot the blood so it doesn't keep going for forever and ever. And the other part of the immune system is what are called the white blood cells. Now, if you're the person who went ahead and just went to the end of this video and to copy down what the chart means at the end, you're going to get to the end and wonder what the WBCs are. And the WBCs are going to be leukocytes. These are white blood cell. Anytime you see site, we're talking cell, leuko meaning white. Right there. White blood cells, or leukocyte, is the more sciencey term for that. And one of them is a natural killer cell. And that cell is going to destroy anything that has been infected. They destroy infected cells. Another kind of white blood cell, and there are so many, but this one is going to be a macrophage. And I like to think of the macro as big and phage as eater. I think macro was probably one of your words in English last year, and phage meaning eater. And this thing will eat whatever pathogens come into the body. And a pathogen is anything that's inside of your body that is bad. Path meaning bad, pathy meaning bad, and pathogens will generate a bad response. Now I'm going to zoom in just a little further down here on the bottom. Hopefully you have a little bit of space here at the bottom. And talk about how sometimes when there's an infection, there will also be need a pen. Let's switch to red. A fever. And the fever has an intention. It's just a raising of the body temperature. And what this causes is the body to make white blood cells. And it also causes those white blood cells to work better and work more efficient. Efficiency of the white blood cells. And they are also going to hopefully slow the pathogen so that it can't do as much work. Now, I will tell you, I've heard recently that we're talking about the body temperature being a little bit lower, but we want to keep the body temperature in something that's not going to damage the body itself. So it needs to be a moderate. A moderate fever is okay. If a fever goes too high, then we're looking at the chance of having some sort of damage to cells that we would like to not have damaged. All right, this ends my notes for the very first defenses that happen against the immune response. All right, so it's good to pause that for just a minute, and now we're going to zoom over to the immune response to a specific pathogen. And that is over here on this side. So I'm gonna zoom in over here to the immune response. We're gonna draw some fun little pictures over here because the immune response to a specific pathogen causes something very specific to happen. And I'll write a little bit neater this time. Specific pathogen. So this is the first time that something comes into any organism's, any animal's body. And we're going to start first with the first step, which is this guy right here. Sometimes he turns out looking like I want him to, and sometimes he doesn't. The macrophage, remember he was active on the other page over there. The macrophage eats the pathogen. And I'm going to draw the pathogen over here as little teeny tiny. Now, sometimes these pathogens are really, really small. Viruses are really, really small. And what happens is this macrophage, who is a big eater, we'll call him Mac, the big eater. And he's also a really sloppy eater that when he eats these little parts of whatever the pathogen is that he is eating, pathogen gets stuck to the outside of him. And these act as antigens. And these antigens generate an antibody. Let me spell that again. Antigen. And they stick to the outside of the macrophage. And it's this warning sign to the other cells that says, I have been infected by something along the way. And when the macrophage has been eaten, he sends out a chemical. And that chemical is going to be called interleukin 1. Inter meaning between, leuco meaning white. 1, it's interleukin number 1 because it's the first thing that happens. And that is going to trigger something called a helper T cell. I'm going to switch back right here. This helper T cell is going to then release a chemical called interleukin 2. Inter meaning between, leuco meaning white, and it's number 2 because it's the second chemical. So I've identified some things here. This red one is a helper T cell. The blue one up here is a macrophage. Those are both cells. And these 2 green ones are chemicals that are released by cells that act as messages that allow the cells to be able to talk to each other. So the macrophage eats a pathogen, and when it does that, those stick to the outside of it. And on the outside of it, these little guys are now stuck, antigens are stuck to the outside. The macrophage releases interleukin 1, and that interleukin 1 travels to the helper T cell. Now, I don't know if you caught this or not, but this helper T cell is going to be the thing that directs everything that happens below it. Now, at this point, interleukin 2 is going to cause a number of reactions to happen. The one over here on the left, we're going to call the cell-mediated response. And over here on the right-hand side, this is now the humoral response. And interleukin 2 triggers, this is a chemical message that causes the cytotoxic T cells to kick into action. And the really neat thing about the cytotoxic is just by looking at the word right here, cyto meaning cell, toxic, toxic. And they are going to destroy any cells that are invaded. Any cells that have been invaded. And they can puncture a little hole right in the outside of the cell that has been invaded, and then it will not be able to maintain its own homeostasis. At the same time, it is also interleukin 2 sends a little bit slower message down here to this, this particular cell. And this cell is called a suppressor T cell. And their job is to stop the immune response from happening. Eventually, you want the immune response to stop, because if it keeps going for forever and ever, then it would destroy the body of the host, and that's not the outlook that we're looking for. All right, I'm going to slip over here then to the other side, to the humoral response. And in the humoral response, this one might be one that you're a little bit more familiar with, because over here we have B cells, and these come from the bone marrow. That's why they're called B cells. They're born in the bone marrow, which is the long bones of the body on the inside of them. And they mature there and grow up, and then they head out to do their job. And these will change into plasma cells. Once they've turned into plasma cells, those plasma cells will produce something called an antibody. Actually, a whole bunch of them, so you may even want to write the plural, IES, there instead. And these are little Y-shaped, I think of them as little nunchuck things that they can throw out and whip them around, and then they can go in and cause the pathogen. Remember, the pathogen is our big invader. Cause the pathogen to clump up together. Once the pathogen is clumped up together, now we can send in another macrophage to do what macrophages do best. Those big eaters. Oh, I forgot to see there in macro. Those macrophages eat up the pathogen that has come in to the body. So this right here summarizes the whole idea of, first, over here on the left-hand side, we're talking about first going in, and over here we are the general response, and then over here in the second one, is the immune response to anytime there's some sort of an infection, a brand new infection, the first time we see something. What's really neat is if there is repeated infections of the same kind, the body builds up those antibodies so that the next time it sees it, it will already have antibodies. It can go back, it's got those plasma cells that stick around for a long, long time. And then instead of doing all that stuff at the top of this page, it can jump right down to the bottom and just do plasma cells to antibodies. So this summarizes the immune response. This is very, very quick overview of the whole thing. What I'm going to recommend is that you go back to the very beginning, look at the blank drawing, and see if you can fill it in just by looking at what's happening.